Okay, welcome again to Fresh Wine. I'm going to continue by talking about that big thing. And whatever that big thing is for you, what it means in a lot of different cases is some big, huge obstacle that you can't figure out how to get past, or some big abyss that you can't figure out how to get over. And I've noticed in talking to people that what tends to happen is that they don't articulate the reality they're facing. They've been ignoring most of it for so long that it's built up a feeling of this would take forever to figure out. So then they ignore it even more, because the bigger it gets, the more time it would take to figure it out and address, and the less they feel capable of facing it. So the things that you're ignoring, the things that you're not articulating, are building up, building up, building up, and glomming together into one big thing. Or sometimes just the sheer number of different realities that you are faced with or tasked with responding to in a moment are just overwhelming, just too much. And it all becomes that one big thing that you feel like you are powerless against. So what I ask people to do, as you already have heard, is journal every day about the times that they've had an opportunity to practice freedom, the times they've noticed they've acted without freedom or lost their freedom. And in that, writing things down, another step in that is to take that big thing and to try to articulate it in your journal or with a friend and say what it is. Again, you get to that point when it's just everything, and you're frustrated with the demand or the request, that you articulate it, that you give words to all the aspects of the reality that you're facing or that you're having trouble facing. The problem is when you have that big block that you are ignoring or trying not to deal with because you have a million other things to deal with, the more you don't deal with it, the more it becomes a weight on you, the more it pulls back at you and becomes more and more daunting to deal with. And the more you take that abyss and avoid the edge, avoid the crossing, avoid finding a path through the abyss, the more you shrink your own boundaries, shrinking away from that edge. So these are different metaphors just to show you that that big thing, whatever it is that you're dealing with, we can deal with together. You can deal with a friend or a therapist by just trying to articulate it. Our minds have these wonderful visual buckets that get filled with images, and it's almost as though we have an infinite capacity to just have images flitting through our brains. And that limitlessness of images is a little bit dangerous, because those images can actually trigger emotions and fear or response or anxiety without our conscious awareness. When we bring things to the conscious awareness, we bring them to be articulated, we bring them to be voiced. And while they are spinning around inside us as just images, they almost increase that sense that there's something we're dealing with that is enormous and huge that we can't articulate. The power to make words of things is, I think, the profoundly human power that gives us access to becoming free of the reactions to those images and the pull of those images to weigh us down or pull us back from the brink of action. So when you articulate the realities that you face, when you put them into words, what tends to happen is that you realize that that huge obelisk of impassable stone has a door in it or has texture in it that you can see through. If you imagine an enormous black piece of fabric that is absolutely obscures the light, And yet the closer and closer you get to it, the tiny bits of light that can leak through the fibers do leak through, and you recognize that it has texture. You recognize that it has permeability. You recognize that that enormous reality is made up of dozens of little different pieces, and each of those then, if articulated, becomes a capacity to act, becomes a place where you can make a judgment about what to do, how to act, how to respond to that reality. As long as the reality remains an unarticulated block or an unarticulated blob or an unarticulated abyss, then you can't act in response to it. So whichever way you're thinking of that big thing that you're facing or refusing to face, this can help you to find a path where your freedom can begin to respond. And what happens is that if you can find any one little piece of all that big thing to make an actual response to make a little judgment, this is how I will act in the face of this reality, then you actually begin to move yourself back into position as a reality yourself. So when I draw a picture of a big obelisk crushing a little circle, I am drawing a picture of a little person who has become an object that's being crushed by some big reality or combination of realities. And sometimes the person who's being crushed gets the advice, be spiritual, be prayerful, come out from under that big rock and think happy thoughts, positive thoughts, spiritual thoughts, prayerful thoughts. And the problem, I think, with that advice is that it misses the actual path to becoming free. It misses the fact that his act is what will make him free, not his escaping from the reality. So, and I'm saying prayer is obviously an act and a constructive act, but when it becomes a way of just avoiding the reality, when it becomes go think spiritual thoughts instead of thinking about the reality you're actually facing, I think it becomes a positive danger because it increases the tendency of someone who's being crushed by reality to dissociate from that reality. And this sometimes leaves people with this polarization between their spiritual life and their concrete or real life. Real life is over there, it's painful, it's maybe traumatic, it's full of practical action, it's full of things I have to do, it's full of things I want to do, but it doesn't connect with my spiritual life. So alternative to escape the being crushed by being spiritual advice, an alternative to that is the advice, become a reality yourself. Recognize that you are a reality. And so I draw the little circle inside the block of things that are real. You are one of the factors of reality. How you feel, what you think, what you're capable of creatively, what you are going through emotionally, what you're experiencing, and the resources, the interior resources that you have. Now, if you are a factor of reality and you enter that reality or approach that reality as a part of the reality, now you begin to illumine that huge object or that deep abyss, and you begin to recognize that texture in the huge block of stone. You begin to recognize the path through the abyss because you begin to illuminate. So this process of asking you to articulate the reality, to come back toward it, is, I think, a path toward freedom that's I've seen over and over and over again be helpful. So why do people not immediately turn toward the big bad thing and start articulating it if they can then quickly become quite a bit freer from it? Well, it casts a shadow. It looms over them. It makes them feel powerless. It makes them feel frightened. Literally, in one situation, to move toward that enormous pain that she felt was to begin to feel that pain again. A part of pulling away from that huge reality was to try to avoid pain. And I take some advice from a book that I have often recommended to people, The Open Focus Brain, and I can link it in the show notes. But the therapist addressed people with chronic pain and recognized that it's the understandable way of someone who is in pain to try to distract themselves from that pain and to thus get away from it, because it can be overwhelming. And what they counseled was to help people move back toward that pain. And again, as they did that with their clients, as they helped coach their clients through movement actually back toward that pain, they were actually helping their clients become present to themselves. And I think, although they didn't put it in these words, I think part of why that therapy was successful for the acute pain or the chronic pain patients was that it helped them to recognize themselves as a factor of reality. What tends to happen to the sense of self in the face of an overwhelming reality is that you lose yourself. You lose the sense of yourself. That enormous reality becomes so overwhelming that you can't find yourself in the picture in a way. So they were doing what I'm doing, helping people move back toward whatever reality they face, articulate it, explore its contours, consider and verbalize the different aspects of it, all without the demand that you solve it, that you make it go away. When someone steps up to their big bad thing, they become a factor of reality themselves. They don't change the reality. For the most part, the reality stays the same, but their relationship with reality takes a quantum leap. And as they begin to approach themselves as a factor of reality, they become able to respond to that reality or to even parts of it with act. And that capacity to act is really the beginning of a growing freedom. I think what the abyss or the enormous obelisk of pain or whatever it is, the big thing you're dragging behind you, the common denominator there is the unmaking of you, the making the person sort of disappear in the face of an enormous reality. Even if you want to look at, Satan's posturing as some ridiculous posturing that he is more powerful than God. The reality wants to loom at you and make you feel small. And you don't need to accept that. You can say, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I can face this reality. I can find texture in it. I can find a little doorway to act. And that act might be something so small that, of course, it's not going to try to change the entire reality. Again, what we're trying to change by one small act is your relationship to reality, your sense that you too are a factor in reality. Another part of what has happened here in this dynamic is that you have become more present to yourself. You've explored the sense that the subjective reality that you're going through is a factor in all that is going on around you. What you're feeling about it, what you're thinking about it, how you're reacting to it inside is a factor in how you experience the reality. So although we would say truth is objective, and we would say objective truth has a primacy, in other words, if there were not the objectively real, then we would not be real as subjects. But the fact is, there is also the subjective reality that needs to be taken into account when coming up with an act that creatively responds to reality. And so if you just respond to what's happening outside you and you don't take into account what's happening interiorly, then you're liable to just be reactive. And we don't want that. If you only dwell on what's happening subjectively to you, then you don't consider the factors of reality and you don't consider yourself a responder to the objective reality going on outside you. Then you become impotent to act, and either way is not good for you. So the sweet spot is, of course, freedom, and I want to talk a little bit more in the next lesson about how you add to the burden of whatever provokes you.